All right, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Well, this week we pick up with vaYiqra, chapter 19, verse 15. Of course, I as per and talk about that and then jump into 15 at some point. My translation of verse 14 was, "You shall not marginalize the deaf, and you shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. Your reverence comes from God. I am Yahweh," it says at the end. And if you'll recall, I said that Onkelos by Drauzine and Wagner, I actually brought that with me today. Whoopsie. Do that. That's just, um, it's a translation of the Torah. It has the Hebrew text and it has the Aramaic translation. And then Drauzine and Wagner wrote commentary on it. It's the best version of the Onkelos work that I have ever seen. The commentary is stellar. And no, I don't agree with everything they say, but 99.9% of it I do. I mean, there's just been like two or three things in there that I just don't buy into. I mean, they may be right and I may be wrong. I'm more than willing to accept that. But until I'm proven wrong, I'm going to stick with what I know, which is, I think, fine. So anyway, that Onkelos work, which was not written by a man named Onkelos, we know that because there's parts of the text that were taken from a text that was written 150 years after the man Onkelos died. So not so much his work. But anyway, and there's a lot more reasons why I don't believe that Onkelos had anything to do with it, but mainly because there was a Greek named Achalos, and all the stories that went with Achalos are told about Onkelos, 200 years after Achalos died. So I don't buy into any of it. But somebody wrote this work called the Onkelos, and he put the Hebrew text in there, and then he put a translation of that Hebrew text right next to it in Aramaic. And it's, as far as translations goes, I don't really think it's all that good of a translation. But the problem that you have is in the time period when that stuff was written, uh, among these particular Jews who did this work, they were Hellenized, very Hellenized, and whoever did this particular translation doesn't recognize even the simplest of Hebrew idioms, which that's one of the things I disagree with the Onkelos by Drauzine and Wagner. They talk about how well, how good he was at it. Oh, no, he wasn't. Have you read his stuff? Obviously they did, but they came to a very different conclusion than I did. But anyway, that is one of the very few things that I disagree with him on, because he didn't seem to recognize. He recognized a number of idioms, but he didn't recognize that it was an idiomatic language, and he missed most of the idioms, to tell you the truth. So I don't agree with them there. But they said in that particular book, and then in parentheses or brackets or whatever, it says the words veYareta may, that's the most important part, Elohecha, uh, which means and fear or and reverence from God. They said those words, the it says that does not appear in the Hebrew and Aramaic of verse, or does appear in the Hebrew and Aramaic of verse 14, where the verse literally states you must fear from your God. They went on to say, we deleted it from our translation because the word from is awkward in the sentence in English. And as I said last week, the problem I have with deleting the word from is this sentence is that it changes the meaning. Generally, in Hebrew, they'll say the word for you many times in a single sentence. And so, because the you is the same you every time, in English, when we translate it, we'll only write you one time. So leaving the word out does not in any way, shape, or form uh, change the meaning. In fact, it for us English, for English speakers, particularly if you don't speak Hebrew, that makes it much easier to understand. It takes away a lot of the confusion. And so I am in total agreement with doing things like that. But there are some words you should never take out, and there are some words you should never add, because at the point you begin to change the meaning, you are breaking God's law. It says don't add to or take away anything from the law. That doesn't mean that you can't add a word or change a word. That's not what it means. It's what that means is don't change its meaning. Because when you change the meaning, then you begin to add to and take away, and that's forbidden by God's law. So when you take that word from out, you change it from your fear comes from God to your fear is of God. Well, that should be an established fact. Your fear, you should have reverence of God. Fear is a terrible word because it has that negative connotation that I'm scared, I'm shaking in my boots, I'm so terrified of, that's not the meaning. The meaning of the word, and the word that we're using here for fear has that connotation at times, but we need to think of that as reverence, because that's fundamentally the main thing you should get from that word is reverence, not fear. Though it is used that way at times, it's mostly used for reverence. So in this case, it should be reverence. And why is that important here? Because our personal reverence of somebody who is blind or somebody who is deaf, it can be a moving target. If we meet somebody blind and we think, oh, that guy's a total jerk, well, isn't our reverence of the blind then maybe tainted a little bit? So it's important that our reverence of the blind is based on our reverence for God, because God's probably not going to get hung up on that person being a jerk, right? Where we might. So that's another reason why that word is so important to leave in that sentence. All right. So anyway, that's our recap of our verse from last week. So let's talk about verse 15. So we're going to start with that very literal. Oop, I'm on the wrong one. Hang on a second. Wait a minute. Hold on. I have to take a look at this. Oh. Okay. Oh, I can't even see those words. Okay. Sorry. I had two of them open because this week I didn't go. Anyway, doesn't matter. I'm on the right one now. Here's the very, very literal translation. Not you shall make they injustice in judgment, not shall bear up faces lowly, and not shall honor faces great in righteousness, and shall judge neighbor you. Because remember, the concentration of this particular verse is on what we do in a day-to-day basis to live a holy life. This is literally the chapter on personal holiness. And does it cover all of it? No. This is, if you will, an overview, or maybe, well, I wouldn't say summation. Let's use overview. I think that's the best way to look at it. So part of what makes us living a day-to-day holy life, as in verse 14, would to be show our reverence, which means, you show respect. These people cannot see your face, so they really can't know if you're being sarcastic or if you're being, um, if you're lying to them or telling them the truth. What are they going to base that on? The sound of your voice can be very deceptive. You can be, making one face and sounding another way. So that's an issue. And if they're blind, you can be sticking something right in front of their feet and they're going to fall over it. But remember from last week, this is not just of physical blindness and physical deafness. This is of metaphorical as well. Sometimes you speak to people about the Bible in particular, and they can't hear what you're saying. So it's not the time to be rude to them. It's not the time to put some stumbling block in front of them that's going to cause them just to walk away from religion altogether. That's not, we should not be doing that, right? That's part of what makes us holy. There are times when you got to be stern with somebody, but that's actually way more rare than we would like to let on. So it starts off with the negative article, lo, and then it says ta'asu. So no, so you will not lift up. Remember, ta'asu is that word of the image that they give is of the ark. Now it was built on the ground. It was sitting on dry land. You couldn't have built that on the ocean back then. Well, if you could have, it would have been very difficult. And so it was built on land. Well, then the waters, the skies opened up, the waters came down, and as the flood began to raise the water began to raise up the ship, right? So that's ta'asu. It's from asa, which is to labor, to work, to manufacture, to fabricate, and all of that kind of stuff. But it's also of that idea of that ship being lifted up. Because as you build something, it's like we say we built it from the ground up. That sort of that comes from this same idea. So hopefully you get what's being said here. So you're not going to lift up avel. That's the word for injustice. So you're not going to manufacture injustice. You're not going to make injustice. You're not going to lift it up. You're not going to have anything to do with it, if you will. And this is ba mishpat. So you don't lift up injustice in judgment. And yes, there are people who say, oh, see, this is only for the judges. No, it's not. We all have to judge things. It's as I said last week. If you suspect that somebody is a child molester, you have to make that judgment within yourself. You're not carrying out some kind of punishment or any of those things. And you should not be, sharing that. Well, you might share that with your, adult family members and maybe your neighbors because you have a concern. You got to be real careful because if you're judging somebody based on you think everybody who's like 70 years old and still dyeing their hair jet black, that's got to be a bad person. Well, you shouldn't be. That's not judgment. There's something about this person, some way that they like. There was this man who was in fact a child molester, and when I met him, one of the first stories I was told is that he was trying to be a mentor to a boy who was 11 or 12 at the time. And on Christmas, in that grown man's house, he put up a Christmas tree, and the boy's nickname was Taz or something like that, because the Tasmanian devil, I guess, because when he was little, he was like a wild, as a tree full of biggers or something. He must have tore everything up that he touched or something. I don't know why he had that. But anyway, this guy had bought uh, one of those teddy bears. What's another word for that? Because it wasn't a teddy bear; it was a Tasmanian devil. What do you call those little stuffed animals? I started saying, "What do you call those stuffed animals?" So he completely covered this tree in those Tasmanian things in honor of that boy. And at that point, I told that boy's parents that that man was a child molester. I was right. They were very angry at me at the time because he was a integral part of their church and he was an upstanding person. And then, a couple of years later, it came out he was molesting many of their children. So I made that judgment based on something that I knew was a sign of that sort of thing. There was way too much interest on that grown man's part on this child, and it was, oh, it crossed a line. And so I saw the signs. I said something. I made a judgment. See how I did that? And I wasn't a judge. We weren't in a court. I did not sentence that man. and it was just between me and the parents. And like I said, they were very angry at me. But then when it came out that I was right, we have a decent relationship again. Uh, but it, that's a tragic story. But we do have to make judgments. You guys following me? We do have to make judgments, especially where our children are concerned. All right. So then it says you don't lift that up in judgment. The what was the word? Something injustice. You don't. You're not injustice. You're not unjust in your judgments. And this is not tisa. Well, that's from asa. It's the same word. And then when you use the same word in the same sentence, they're rarely going to be spelled exactly alike, right? So the tav has been added to it. So you will not, you shall not, if you will, lift up. And then what are we going to lift up? Panay. Well, that's face. That's this thing right here. Face says it's in plural because if you're alive in biblical Hebrew, it has to be in the plural. You don't say it in the singular unless they're dead. Uh, for those of you who may not remember or don't know at all, there's a reason for that. If you're alive, whether you realize it or not, your face is always moving. You can't see it generally, you can't feel it, but your cheekbones and all of this muscle in here is constantly moving if you're alive. And it's actually based on that in the Hebrew language. If you're alive, there's the movement. And so if you talk about God, you cannot talk about God in the singular, or that's a dead God, that's an idol. So God is spoken of in the plural, not because there's three in one. That idea did not exist when the Bible was written. It didn't even exist when the New Testament was written. That idea came later, and it came out of dualism. That you essentially went from one God to two gods, eventually to three, who are somehow one. It's the new math, 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. Rich Man's Calco came up with that a couple days ago. I love it. But anyway, that's what you have, though. It's new math. 1 + 1 + 1 will never equal 1. Sorry. But anyway, our next word is, so you don't lift up the faces, dal. That's the Hebrew word for lowly. It's of the feeble, the weak, the powerless, the poor, people who are not noble. It's used of all of that. It's from the root dalal, and that's to hand down, to be pendulous, which is just, like a pendulum, to swing back and forth. Then it says, and I'll try to make that make sense here in a second. Then it says velo and not, so we're adding the negative article to something else. Tidar, which is you will not, because of the velo, and you will not show honor. And it's for the word to be large, to be swollen. So if you put somebody up on a pedestal, you have made them large. You are swelling up your image of that person. And it's also of you yourself. Like if you get swollen up in pride, we'll use the word the same way. So it's of splendor and ornament. You're really piling on, thinking somebody's all that in a bag of chips, as they say, or used to say. I doubt they say that anymore. And this is panay. We're back to the faces again. So what does that mean? I think I missed that a while ago. That means in the presence of, or before. If you're in the presence of somebody, you essentially are face to face with them, right? And so that we use the word in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew anyway, of faces, to indicate that you're in the presence of, or you're before somebody. So in the translations, into English, they'll either say before or in the presence of, and that's quite correct. Uh, don't think I've ever disagreed with that anywhere. Then it says Gadol, so it's in the face of or before Gadol, the great. Um, it's of magnitude, of largeness, of number, of multitude. Great of age means you're very old. I am myself am only 23, so I haven't reached that great of age thing. I guess when I turn really white, this is my blonde hair. But when it turns white, anyway. Then the next word is Zedek. You hear it? Zedek, righteousness. And by the way, I think I said this a while ago in the earlier thing. The Bible, the Hebrew Bible, which the Christians call the Old Testament, and that is so wrong. But it's because words were changed. They talk about a new and an old covenant, and that started in the book of Yirmiyahu, or Jeremiah, as most people know it. He talked about in English a new and an old covenant. Except in Hebrew, he's talking about a new and an old sacrifice. But Rob, I looked it up in my handy dandy brand new Hebrew English lexicon, and it says covenant. Of course it does. That's not what the word means, but of course it does. And I've said this before. If you take a lexicon that's from the 1900s and read what Zedek means, you'll see covenant. Well, that's not the right word? What was I just talking about? Well, let's use Zedek. That's just fine. You look up. No. Berit. That's the word I want to talk about. That's where I was going. Right. That's going to say a covenant. Blah blah blah. No, it has nothing to do with it. But if you look at some of the other stuff it says, it'll talk about a sacrifice, and it'll talk about the shedding of blood of an animal. That's still in there, but they've added this thing about a covenant to it. And if you don't know any better, you're going to, and all you know is that yours says covenant, and you see this says covenant, you're going to say, well, that must be right. And you're not going to know there's something wrong with that. So then you take one, a current one, and you compare that to the one in the 1900s. Pretty much says the same thing. But then you take that and you look at something from the 1800s, and it begins to get further and further away from the idea of covenant. Go to the 1700s, and maybe it'll say covenant, maybe not. Depends on which one you look at. But once you get past the 1700s, it won't say covenant. It will only talk about sacrifice and the shedding of blood of an animal, because the word is sacrifice, not covenant. But over time, words change their meaning. They change their application and stuff like that in different languages. Well, the biblical Hebrew, you got to take it back to what did it mean back then, because what it means now is irrelevant. What it meant back then is what is relevant. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because that's before all of the changes. Moshe had no idea anybody was ever going to, or Yirmiyahu in this case, had no idea that word was going to change its meaning, because he only knew what it meant in his lifetime. And so we have to take it back to what did he mean? Same thing with the New Testament. When it starts talking, as it's called, when it starts talking about an old and a new covenant, you have to realize that idea, that concept didn't exist when those words were written. So, and what they meant back then was exactly what Yirmiyahu meant. It was an old and a new sacrifice. The covenant of God has never changed. It's the same covenant, the one given at Sinai, or Sinai, as most people say. It's actually pronounced Sinai. But nothing about God's covenant has changed. And when Yeshua, known as Jesus these days, and I use that sentence very loosely, because I don't think Jesus and Yeshua of the New Testament. I think the Yeshua of the New Testament. Let me say this right. I'm saying this wrong. The Yeshua that was spoken about by Josephus and by the Talmudim, or the followers of Yeshua in the first century, is not the same man as the Jesus that began to be spoken of from the time of Constantine's war till now. I would argue that those are two completely different people. And the second one is just a cartoon caricature of the first one. In other words, the second one has never existed. For one thing, the J did not exist until 600 years ago. The sound associated with the J didn't exist till roughly 400 years ago. In other words, when the J came along, all it was is, let's call it the I for our current alphabet. And what had happened was they took the I and trying to make it fancy and put a little tail on it. Look at your early um, King James Bible, and you'll see that I has a tail on it. Now that you know it's an I, so the I made the y sound, and so when that tailed I became a J, it still had the y sound 600 years ago. And somewhere in between that 600 years and 400 years ago, that sound morphed from y to j. So we went from Jesus to Jesus, and that has since morphed to Jesus. Anyway, don't know why I said all that. But what I want to say about those New Testament letters and Josephus and the Hebrew Bible called the Old Testament, the only people that they ever called righteous were people who were Torah observant. They never said that about anyone who was not Torah observant. Same way for emunah, which is translated very wrongly translated as faith, but is also used of the faithful when it talks about people being faithful. Those letters and the Hebrew Bible and Josephus and others from that time period, they were only spoken of the faithful, the people called faithful. The only people called faithful were people who were Torah observant. And the only people who were called, what was that other word? Just popped in and out of my head. The way. The way was not a title of the people who followed Yeshua. That is so completely wrong. That came long after the fact. When you read of the way in the stuff from the first century, that is talking about people who follow the way. You know, the one where God said to Moshe, these people have turned quickly from the way that I gave them. The Torah. Following the Torah is the way. So when they speak of that, and it's only one or two times that I can't even remember. I know I translated it, and if it's in there, then I certainly found it. If I did, then, and I honestly can't remember if that was actually written in the Greek or not, because I wasn't looking at I know it's in the English, but I'm not positive it was in the Greek because I don't actually remember that. But if it's in there, I promise you, it's not calling the group the way, it's calling the way they lived the way. In other words, Torah observance. So you have to know these things to understand even the New Testament letters. I'm just going to throw that out there. All right. So we have Tishpot. All right. Is that, let me see if that was connected to this. I'm kind of, so you don't show honor. You should not honor in the presence of the great in righteousness. So we've gone over those words, and this is tishpat. So mishpat being the ordinances, the actual law. That's actually the Hebrew word for law. Not Torah does not mean law; it means instruction. Then mishpat is called that's the word for law. So this is that word, but they've added the tav. So you shall judge, and since there's no negative here thing, you shall judge. Then it says mitacha. I guess there must be translation of neighbor here, but the ami is my people. So my people, you should have been what it literally should have said. So here's the translation. You shall not do injustice in judgment, nor shall you treat unjustly, which is the lift up the faces, that's an idiom, nor shall you treat unjustly the lowly, and you shall not, it says honor faces, that's an idiom. You shall not show favoritism. That's what honor faces means. You shall not show favoritism. To the great, in righteousness shall you judge others. And again, this is not just of the judges, because this entire chapter is addressed to the people of Israel. It is not addressed to the judges. So you follow why I think this is so important for us to understand. This is not for the judges. Well, it is for the judges. They're the people of Israel, just like we are. But it's not a law just for judges. That's all I'm trying to say. Even Ezra wrote that the word ta'asu, lift up, and then in English it said deal, is written, to deal with, is written in the plural to show us that the law applies both to judges and regular people. This is, of course, wrong and right. It is wrong because Hebrew grammar concerning plurality does no such thing. So he's wrong in that. Plurality in biblical Hebrew generally means that something goes on without end. However, it never connects two things together, which is what he's doing here. Conjunctions are used for that, like the vav as a conjunction is used for that purpose. So he is right that this verse applies to judges and common people. The text is specifically written to the congregation of Israel, which includes the judges. So that's how he's right, but his reasoning is completely wrong. We all have, I've already been through this, we all have to judge others. And I think I've laid out a pretty good argument for why that's so important. And I think I said this last week concerning the judgment, but if you judge someone to be a gossip, you're probably a big gossip yourself, maybe the biggest one in town. Further, if you ostracize somebody for their bad behavior, you will be ostracized by God for your bad behavior. Put another way, we must judge others by the fruit of Torah hanging from the tree of their lives, right? However, when we deal out punishment, because when we deal out punishment, we had better be righteous in our punishment. Because the second we become guilty of that same crime, so if you have judged somebody to be a gossip, therefore you have, say, counseled your friends not to hang around with the gossip, what do you think is going to happen to you when you gossip? Judge not that you be judged, for with the judgment that you deal out, you will be judged. That's New Testament. It's very, very Jewish. Absolutely in line with all of the teachings of the mainstream Judaism of the first century. Be careful. All right. Let's go on to verse 16. Very literally, not shall walk slander with people you, not shall stand upon blood, friend your, I Yahweh. Of course, that's God saying this, not me. But I bowed my head when I said his name. It's just tradition, not a law. So we start off with the negative article lo, which not, do not, that kind of thing. Then it says telech. It is from halach, it's from to go, to walk, to put one foot in front of the other. But again, this is idiomatic here. But it says, don't walk, or you shall not walk, or do not walk, rachil, which is slander, which is funny because that's from the same root that you get the word for foot. But anyway, slandered, detraction, to go about for the sake of slandering. These English meanings are not really getting the job done, but it's from the root rahal, to go about, to walk, to for the purpose of trafficking, to traffic, to be a merchant. It's of merchandising. And so since we're speaking, they get the idea of slander, because if you're going around slandering somebody, you're merchandising slander. You're walking about spreading slander. And so that's how they get that idea from this in Hebrew. Then it says be amecha, with people you. It's that same word from a while ago. God's people. That's a group that identifies in some way. So if you're born in America and you're among the group of people who love America and appreciate our freedom, what little we have left. We are truly a fascist nation at this point. The government has colluded with big business, and that's fascism. The government was telling Facebook and Twitter and everybody else who to cancel, and deciding what was acceptable speech, which is a violation of our, right to free speech. That's fascism. So we have lost an awful lot of our freedom in this country, but we still have an awful lot of freedom left, right? And so some of us are still kind of patriotic, still proud that we served this country in the military, like I am. I'm proud of that. But anyway, if you identify as an American, that's of a people, Americans. Let's say you're from Israel. If you're from Jerusalem, maybe you identify as a Jerusalemite, or Sabra, whatever it's called these days in Israel. That's a people. And maybe you take it out wider, and if you're of the Jewish family, you call yourself a Jew. I certainly call myself a Jew. So that's a people, right? It's a group of that identifies in some way. Anyway, so it's with people you, so it's with your people. Lo, which means not. Ta'amod, amad, to stand, to set firmly, to sustain, to not be moved physically or even mentally. It's used both ways. And this is all, which means on or upon, dam. Well, that's the word for blood. You're not going to stand on the blood. You got to know this is an idiom, right? Because how are you going to stand on blood? If you're standing in a pool of blood, you're standing in it. Technically, you're kind of on it, I guess. Anyway, this is an idiom. Then we have re'echa. Re'ah? That's in. That's not just a acquaintance. That's not just a chavra, a companion. That is an intimate friend. That's somebody them better than they know yourself kind of friend. This is way beyond just, well, I kind of know that guy. This is somebody that you truly consider a friend. And that's important. Why is okay? This is Ani Yahweh. So I am Yahweh God. It's very important that we understand this, the difference between a word actually used for neighbor, or chavra, a chaver, a more of an acquaintance than a friend. Maybe you're friendly with them, but it's more of, where am I'm over here. All of a sudden I got confused which camera I was supposed to be looking at. You've got that. There was this song, "He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother." Well, put your brother on your shoulders and tell me he's not heavy. Oh, well, he only weighs 90 pounds and I'm 220 pounds of solid rock muscle. Yeah, let's see how far you walk with that guy until you change your mind. Your brother is heavy. I'm just saying. Some of them are heavier than others. You wouldn't want me on your shoulders. Anyway, um, that's not biblical. We're not here to look out for all of mankind. What the Torah teaches is that we take care of our own. And if everybody else would take care of their own, there would not be nearly the need. All of these people who are trying to go out and feed all of the poor and clothe all of the poor, trying to eradicate poorness in the world, have got it wrong. If you want, for one thing, God Almighty said that the poor would always be with us. So sorry, you're never going to get rid of the poor. But what's funny about that is the poorest people in America today, and I mean the poorest of the poor, are richer than the poor people in the Bible. Much richer than the poor people of the Bible. Our homeless population are richer than the people of the Bible. You go and you walk through one of those nasty homeless encampments, particularly in California, you'll find that those homeless people all have a phone. They all have food to eat, way more than they need. And we're talking good food. They all have all of the clothing that they could ever want. And they actually have, if you will, a roof over their head. Maybe it's just a tent, maybe it's cardboard, but they have more than the biblical people had. So they would have been considered rich. There are places in the world where they're more like the Bible. Without a doubt, there are places like that. And there might even be a small pocket of that in America somewhere. I've never seen or heard of it, but there may be. Almost without a doubt, there probably is. Just saying, what we think of as poor is generally not what the Bible is talking about. So they will always be with us. But the reason why the word for friend and neighbor are two different words is because the neighbor is more of an acquaintance, where the friend, Rea, is of an intimate friend. Because if we would just take care of our own, if the Jews take care of their own, the Christians take care of their own, the Muslims take care of their own, the whatever take care of their own, everybody would be taken care of. But when we try to make this thing bigger than it's supposed to be, and we try to fix everyone and everything, one, we're stepping out of our purview. Just look at all these people who came to America and they were putting them in 5-star motels. They were bringing all this, 5-star food, whatever that's called, gourmet food to these people, and they were just tossing it. The people would open it up, look at it, close it back up, and throw it in the garbage. And so they're spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on all this food. The people are throwing it away. Why? Well, because it was nasty to them. Is not food that they were used to eating, and it was awful. It made them gag. It made them throw up. They didn't want to eat that. You wouldn't have wanted to if it made you gag. If you're hungry enough, you would have. But obviously that wasn't an issue for those people, and they were just throwing all of that food away because America's trying to overdo it here. They didn't stop and say, well, do these Muslims eat pork? Should we really be trying to feed them pork? Do these Jews eat pork? Should we be trying to feed them pork? You see what I'm saying? No, take care of your own, because that helps you to know what they actually do need. Anyway, the translation. You shall not participate. That's the halak, the walk. You shall not participate in spreading slander with your people, nor shall you defend the guilt. nor shall you defend the guilt of others. I am Yahweh. Of this participate, the walking and the spreading of slander. Onkelos, not the new translation, but the actual onkelos, changed the Hebrew word lo telech rachil, which literally means do not walk slander, to lo techol kurzin. Now that's Aramaic. That's not English. No, it's not English. I meant to say it's not Hebrew, which literally means do not eat destruction. So the Hebrew says do not walk slander, and he changed it to do not eat destruction, which may just mean that that's an idiom that was known in Aramaic, because trust me, they had their idioms, that was equivalent to the idiom that's written here. Hopefully you know what I'm saying. But he did change it. Rashi believed that these words meant that we should not eat with a slanderer, as it shows our agreement with them. So you see the literal understanding of the idiom, because he didn't know the idiom. Rashi did not speak Hebrew. Period. End of story. I don't care what anybody tells you. That man did not speak Hebrew. He did not recognize the simplest of Hebrew idioms. So anyway, so he's taken this very literally. Nachmanides felt that these words meant do not wink at a slanderer. Again, somebody taking it literally because there's no Hebrew understanding here. However, to eat slander would be to listen to it, to greedily consume it, because it's more than just listening. It's you're into this. To eat with a slanderer cannot be avoided if that slanderer is your spouse. Just throwing that out there. And to wink at a slanderer, would be to agree with it secretively, right? The Hebrew is much more concise here. Do not participate in spreading slander. All right, stand on blood. Pseudo Jonathan and Sifra saw these words in a very literal way. Again, no Hebrew language skills here, or at least none of the biblical text in this case, because Pseudo Jonathan and Sifra are written early enough that they may have actually spoken Hebrew. So I don't want to say that about these two words. I'm very leery of that being the case, but I'm not going to say it wasn't. Anyway, they both state that we cannot idly watch our brother's blood while it's being shed. Kind of leans to my argument that they probably didn't speak Hebrew. However, these words have absolutely nothing to do with the actual bloodshed, as they are a Hebrew idiom. Okay. Better look at the time. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. Well, if I can't get quite through it, we'll pick back up on it next week, because I'm really running out of time here. The literal translation of 17 in English is not you shall hate brother you, in heart you, confront you shall confront. Oh, we'll be talking about this next week. Confront you shall confront, neighbor you, and not shall bear up upon him sin. So we start off with the negative article. We've got T Sena, which is from Asa. So you're not going to lift up. That should always be a indication that you're looking at an idiom. That one word should almost always get you should pay attention when you see that word. You may be coming up on an idiom, because most of the time you will be. Et ahicha, your brother. So you don't lift up on your brother. And this is actually the word for brother. Like I have a brother named Nathan in English. And I have a brother, I'm not sure if his name is Bob or Bobby, to tell you the truth. I think it's Bob. It almost has to be Bobby. And my name's Robert. So he's my other brother Bob. Anyway, or my other brother Rob, whatever. Same dad, different moms. But anyway, that's what we're talking about. You know, your brothers and your half brothers, not sisters. This is strictly masculine. These are brothers. This is use of kinsmen. So if you're all Jews, you could say that you're brothers. But if you're talking about these guys over here are Muslim and we're Jews, there you can kind of say that we're brothers because we all come from the same father, Abraham, right? We had different mothers. So to that end, but we're so far removed from each other for the most part. I'm not so sure I would use that terminology, but it's too bad because if we really saw ourselves as brothers, the Quran says you can't attack a brother. The Jewish Bible says that you can't attack a brother. Maybe we'd all get along a little better. That came out of nowhere. All right, so then it says, "Be levadecha," lev, the heart, in heart, you, in your heart, in your heart. This may not even be of actions outwardly, right? And the heart is the seat of the senses, the emotions, the affections of the mind. In Hebrew, you hear people say, "My heart says yes, but my mind says no," or something like that, or "My mind says yes, and my heart says no," or what. I can't even think of how people used to say that because I haven't heard that term in a long time. Because we think that we can think one thing and want another, but in Hebrew, the mind, the heart, the soul, that's all one thing. And when they say with all your heart, soul, and strength, that's not three bullet points. That's not three separate things. You shouldn't be looking up in the dictionary to find out what each of these three words mean. Hebrew doesn't work that way. That is very American. That is very, very Western. And that concept did not exist in the Bible. There's a couple of reasons why they changed the words when they mean the same thing. And it's where we get the idea of, when you're in English writing class, particularly well, I learned this in seventh grade, I'm sure. Try not to use the same word twice in the same sentence. That comes from Hebrew. As far as I know, we're the first people to do that. That may have actually happened in the Mesopotamia letters because Hebrew is from Mesopotamia, and we now know because of the work of Kasuto that the Torah in particular was written in the Mesopotamian epic poetic style and used all of the same grammar rules. So that may have actually just come further than even Hebrew and go all the way back to Mesopotamia, which now that I'm talking about, I kind of think it probably does. I'd have to look it up, but I think it probably is safe to say. Anyway, so you're not going to do this in your heart. Hochecha. That's the word confront. But it sounds real negative, doesn't it? Like you're going to have this confrontation, this negative screaming match. But this is to be in front of someone, to be face to face with someone. And it's for the purpose of clearing the air, to make something clear, to make direct contact with somebody is called confrontation. It only becomes a negative idea because remember, everything has a positive and a negative idea in Hebrew. All of the verbs do that. So a confrontation can be a good thing. It can be you're not arguing, you're both so excited about what you're talking about that your voices are getting loud and faster, but nobody's mad at each other. We're just excited, right? That's that same idea of when it gets heated and angry and you're screaming and calling each other names. And that's confrontation too, right? So it spans a very wide concept here. It's not just that. but it's also used of rebuking somebody. And that's not pointing your finger. You're wrong and I'm right and I have the truth and you do not. No, that's not a Bible thing. That's a Western thing. To rebuke somebody biblically is to correct them, to point, to make them understand why they're wrong. You can't just say you're wrong. You have to be able to tell them why they're wrong. That's a rebuke. And see how we think of that as a negative thing? Well, it can be a negative thing, but it's not always. So it's of the idea of arguing, not a negative argument, but of uh, debating. That's probably a better word, of arguing your point so that somebody can understand where you're coming from. It's making it clear. Then we have, that's followed up by tohiach. It's the same word, isn't it? Yes, it's exactly the same word. So argue, argue. Face, face. Confront, confront. Make clear, make clear. I like it that way better because it is more in line with this. So we have, after in your heart, it says ho cheach. That's of the making it clear. Our next word is tohiach. Same word. That is followed by et amitecha, your people. So this is Jews correcting Jews. This is not Jews correcting Christians. This is not Jews correcting Muslims. This is, you know what I'm saying? It's got to be your people. Because that's your root word here. It says velo and not tisa, you'll lift up. Again, you should know something. It's probably going to be an idiom. Alav, over him. You will not lift up over him. Chet. Well, that's the word for sin. You get out a bow and arrow and you miss the mark. Oh, that is such a terrible, that is the worst explanation of sin I've ever heard. But, the best one I've ever heard is found in 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. 1, 3, 4. Just leave out the 2. 1, 3, 4. Whew, I am about to run out of sin. Because that verse says, everyone who commits sin is also in rebellion of the Torah, comma. So we're not done. Because it goes on to say, sin is Torah, rebellion. 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. So that tells you what sin is and what sin is not. If God said do it and you don't, you're a sinner. If God says don't do it and you do, you're a sinner. And as I like to always point out when I say this, those New Testament letters also say, for we know that God does not hear a sinner. So if you're in violation of God's law, over here living by grace instead of the law, God's not hearing you. That's what the New Testament says. I'm not the one who said that. New Testament said that, Mr. Christian. Okay, I'll go ahead and give you the translation here. We'll talk about the translation now that we've gotten through the words. We'll talk about that next time. So my translation is, you should not hate your Torah observant brother. It's the only way it's going to be your brother if you're Torah observant. In your heart, you not hate him in your heart. You shall absolutely confront your neighbor. That's why confront. You shall absolutely confront. It's very important that you understand that you're going to have to confront this person who you're starting to feel hate for. Retro. Hold on. Thought I had a little bit more time. Sorry. You shall absolutely confront your neighbor, and you shall not hold your neighbor's sin over them. We're going to get into that next week. This is very important in our walk in holiness. Shalom, shalom, everybody. The blessing, vaYiqra. Yavarecha Yahweh v'yish merecha. Ya'er Yahweh panai v'lecha v'hunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.